got a secret weapon for you that's going to skyrocket your sales without the unnecessary headaches that come along with using one of the big player CRM systems. That secret weapon is Close CRM. Now, let's face it, we've all been there. We've used a clunky, confusing system that kind of makes you want to throw your laptop out the window. Well, fear not, Close is here to save your time, money, and sanity. Close has all of the powerful sales tools you need, minus the drama, to manage your leads, track your deals, and crush your targets effortlessly. It has calling, emailing, SMS, multi-channel sequences, and it even has meeting tracking built right in. It's easy to set up and implement. You can stop screwing around with CRMs that aren't built for you and start selling and managing customers today. You can start a free trial using the link in the show notes, special for SSP fans. All right, today I'm speaking with Andy Teipen. Andy has led sales for several early stage SaaS companies and has coached numerous reps to success throughout his leadership career. In today's episode, we talk about his own career transition from selling audio equipment and sound into the SaaS category. We speak a little bit about his expertise in the tech ed space within SaaS. We also talk about some ways to improve your category knowledge, specifically how sellers can go out and learn more about who their buyer is and the industry that they're selling into. And lastly, we talk about having human conversations in your deal cycle to improve your credibility, authenticity, and to ultimately become a better seller. With all that said, welcome, Andy. Welcome, Andy. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we're live now, and I want to just start out really quickly introducing you to the listeners. So maybe start back early in your career. I want to hear how you got into sales, specifically how you got into tech sales.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't have a normal path. Maybe nobody has a normal path into sales. It seems like everybody has a meandering story, and mine started with music. I have 2 music degrees. So I've got a bachelor's in K-12 music education. So I kind of think like a teacher, and I've got a master's degree in music technology. So it's more on the recording side of things. And that's the one that sort of led me down a path. I actually did an internship from my master's or my graduate degree with a room acoustics company. So think of, like recording studio, home theater. Back in the day, before all the technology was around, the sound that comes out of your speakers bounces around the room, and we made products to control that. So that was my music side, kind of coming into a business side of things, and I became a sales person through that, regional manager of the Western United States for this manufacturer, and loved it because it was kind of like teaching people what they didn't know about room acoustics, and that's kind of formed my view of sales. Is really just teaching, somebody where they are and where they could be, and then helping them close that gap. So that was kind of where I started in sales. Had some formal training, did go through some Sandler training as part of that. But my next stop was in marketing agency. So I have a background in marketing by sitting with business owners and figuring out what was working for them and what was not, and then how can marketing kind of close that gap. So that gave me a very unique perspective of marketing technology and how that lends itself to sales. So that's kind of how I got my education, through doing, is what I call it, versus education through actual a degree in marketing or anything like that. So,
what kind of agency was it? Was it like marketing services, media, banners? I'm a transplant from the media industry into software, so I'm always curious to hear. And it seems like that's a real theme. Is most people, a lot of people, I shouldn't say most people, a lot of people transition from a media or an ad sales background into tech for a number of reasons that I could get into, but I want to hear a little bit more about.
Yeah. So my first stop at an agency was more on the creative side. They were doing some rebranding, but mostly working with brands to reconsider their website, build out their website, build mobile apps. That's becoming easier and easier these days. But back in the day, you had to really kind of start from scratch and build mobile apps that did, sales, talk to your sales force and did things like stuff that's really out of the box. We were trying to figure it out on the fly. our developers had gotten the early Apple software to develop on iOS, and that was a big deal, big differentiator to be able to build those out. So a lot of that kind of technology back end to help people do smarter, faster in kind of the early digital age. And then I moved over to more of the branding side, talking about more about the messaging and how do we reach those customers? How do they talk about themselves, and how do their customers talk about them, and then leveraging that. So I kind of got an interesting cross section of not only the tech back end and being able to speak to that, but how do you talk about what you do, and what do they care about? What do your customers actually care about? So that's driven a lot of my thinking as a sales leader as I moved into more of the tech side and ed tech startups.
Let's dig into that, because a lot of listeners out there maybe don't get a chance to go through the marketing and branding school before they get into sales. They've stumbled into sales right out of school. Maybe they did a stint in something like media sales, but they didn't necessarily get formally trained. And I know you weren't formally trained. It was more kind of hands-on falling into stuff, but what are some lessons for sellers what are some lessons sellers can borrow from folks that are in branding or marketing that's focused more on the brand?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I mean, there's no bigger motivator than knowing that you're going to sell to marketers who may have an idea of how the technology works. So as a salesperson, I was like, I need to consume everything I can. I need to be maybe just one step ahead of where they are. So there were a lot of whiteboard sessions with my creative team and my technology team of bringing Andy up to speed on how things work. So I think that's part of it is really dig in and understand the technology behind it and how that can help your customers, and not just creating something to create something because that's on your price list, but creating something that actually does something for your customer to reach their customers. So I think that was a good lesson. Let's create something because we can move the needle. We want to move revenue. We want to move, your marketing metrics. We want to get likes, shares, all of that. So trying to move those things and be really intentional about that. But I think the biggest piece, and it's relevant no matter what the technology is around your message and speaking the language of the customer, and why should they give a shit about what you're saying? I hate jargon. There's a lot of jargon, especially in tech, and jargon's kind of takes over, and it drives me crazy. It's like, let's not use those words because we don't know how technical the person is that we're talking to. Let's not make any assumptions here. And I think if you use too much jargon, you can almost get lost in the conversation. Like, what are we really talking about here? So I think it's finding the words that your customer uses and find out what they care about, and then forming your questioning as a salesperson around what do they care about? How do we speak your language?
Yeah, I think that's a way that a lot of reps lose people quickly as you go into, I've called it before and I've heard it called technobabble or jargon. And it's just really easy for the prospect to kind of glaze over and not care once they're, it's out of their element. They're just not used to hearing a lot of these terms that we of course hear from our product marketing team, and they get early. We know all the jargon because we, our leaders talk about it and it's in our internal huddles and things like that. But then when you go to the prospect or the buyer and they're, they don't know an acronym for something, or they're not familiar with a certain term, then I think it's just a really easy way to lose people. So I love that philosophy of yours is just, keeping it really simple and using plain language, not trying to overcomplicate the pitch with a bunch of jargon.
Yeah, there was I did a speech many moons ago for the American Marketing Association, and I had done some research on it, and I don't remember where I gathered but this is kind of an example. People didn't know what HTML meant. And when surveyed, I think like most of the people thought it was like an STD or something, right? Like, I mean, so, you got to think about that. It's like, well, wait a minute, where are we coming from here? And so you even simple things like ROI, in ed tech, I sell next to a lot of educators who do not have a sales and marketing background. They're like, Andy, what does ROI mean? I was like, okay, so you So I think we forget sometimes how, people have different backgrounds and they got to the seat where they are in different ways. And so using common language around that just so, maybe, hey, let's make sure that the effort that we put into this can be justified by the revenue that we can drive or something like that, right? That we're getting a good return on our investment. And they go, okay, now I'm on board. Now I'm educated. Now we can maybe use ROI as a talking point. But really kind of starting slow with them and making sure that, hey, we're all on the same page here and that, you're not making assumptions.
Wow, that's a good reminder for all sellers, because no matter who you're selling to, you're just, again, likely speaking to things that just may not be in their periphery. Like it's not in their purview, right? They don't think about, if you're an educator, you're selling to educators, they're not thinking about ROI. If you're selling to marketers, they may not be thinking about, S3 cloud storage, right, on Amazon Web Services, right? So it's really, you got to know what ICP is and be able to really, and ICP, ideal customer persona, for anyone listening who doesn't know what ICP is. So I agree with that. And I think that must be, in some ways a superpower, right? Is to be able to simplify things and to be able to take it back so that you're understood by your specific audience. And again, in a way that makes it simple, because I think people buy simple. When I think about Google to In-N-Out Burger, simplicity is a huge business model. And the more simple you can keep your tech sales process, the better.
Yeah, I used to challenge our writers with what I call the mom factor. If I can explain what they do to my mom, my mom is a wonderful lady and she's smart, but she's not a tech savvy in a lot of ways. She's getting better. But if I can explain it to my mom and my mom goes, okay, now I get it, like, then we're getting somewhere. Now we've broken it down to the layer where it's like, I understand what your business does for other businesses. And I think you almost have to take it there so you can build it back up. You're going to find your technical people, right? And you can speak to them. You'll identify them in conversation. But if you don't start with a real, just here is what we do, so people can identify, like, well, I want to keep talking to you or I don't. They can kind of self-selectively understand what you do. I think you almost have to start there.
Yeah. Before the session today, you and I did a little brainstorming, and you talked a little bit about having conversations with humans. And I think this is a nice segue into, human selling to humans, human to human selling, right? Talk to us a little bit about your there and how you've coached reps in the past to be, humanize, I guess is one way to put it, right? To be able to be more human in the sales process.
Yeah. I think there's a balance, right? I mean, we're trying to come up with a process that's repeatable so that we have multiple reps to be able to do things. And I think we get really caught up in a sales cadence, and it's got to look like this, and it's got to be a call, and then there's 2 emails, and then there's a call, but there's no voicemail, and that right, there's this cadence. And I think to some degree, you got to have kind of a plan to go forward. You got to start somewhere. So I think it's okay to have those things, but we almost get stuck in the cadence and then the message, right? What is the message? What's that first message? What's the second one? Well, I don't know. Where are they? What do they need to hear from you? What's their situation? Hopefully you've done a little bit of, early, just kind of quick digging to find out kind of where they're coming from and using something relevant for them. I can help you this way, or I see you're doing this, want to know more about that. But reaching folks, and once you get them, not just rolling through a list of questions. And I think that's the big flaw. Okay, I got time with you. You've agreed to give me 5 minutes. I get to tell you what I think. And then obviously we want to do some learning to see where they're at. But I think doing that, again, not using jargon and using kind of just a good line of questioning and then seeking to understand. And I think that's where we kind of fall apart. I understand the question, but I don't think reps often understand why they are asking the question. And then I think when we do ask the question, asking the follow-up question, that's usually the more important question, is the follow-up behind that. And that's where I think we fall flat. I've seen reps just go through the questions and we see recordings of it after the fact and go, okay, we could, what could we have done better here? we've got a bunch of questions and you've got a bunch of data, but I could find that data out later, and most of that data is on their website. So we might have failed in really connecting with that individual. So how do you find out what they're in charge of, right? Well, you ask them, what are you charged with? See, like, what, is that important to you? Out of all the things that are important to you today, where does this one fall in line? Yeah. And who owns that problem with you, right? Like, and really getting into it and having a conversation. And it's the whole kind of seek to understand, but actually giving a shit about understanding is a big one. Because I think there's a lot of folks who are like, I got the pain, I drew it out. It's like, well, did you really? I mean, you that might be the problem they're solving for, but there's no urgency. They don't care. It's not pain if they don't care about it. So I think that's kind of the path that everything is kind of going that way, right? Is trying to have these conversations with humans. It's just, again, I think about my mom, like ask my mom about, a question on a topic that we're having a conversation about. I'm going to keep asking her questions until I go, okay, I think I get it. And I think in a selling situation, you can do that. And then you probably need to recap, right? Because it's not your mom. You need to recap from them and go, what I'm hearing from you is this, is that, what am I missing, right? And let them kind of fill in the gaps for you.
So this is an area where I think I could still, clearly work on asking kind of deeper questions and seeking more towards understanding. I think the tendency for everybody, it's probably just human nature, is your line of questioning, and you're obvious, a lot of times we listen in order to respond rather than listen to understand. Hopefully that makes sense. But I know, especially early in my career, the whole intent behind listening was so that I was ready to come back with something or to reply with something. And really, really hard skill. It's a hard transformation to make, right? To go from, I'm listening to this prospect talk because I need to be ready to say something that'll help sell the deal, right? Versus I want to listen to just truly get as much information as I can about the situation, about the problem, about the challenge, whatever it is. Like I need to listen for understanding so that I can come back later and have, a very well-crafted proposal or solution, or, value prop, whatever you want to call it, to speak to this thing, and showing that I clearly understand it. In understanding it, I can sell to it better. But I think the tendency, and it's really, really hard to kick the habit, is to just listen so that we can reply on the fly. How you've coached a lot of people over the course of your career, a lot of reps. How have you coached them to move from, point A to point B on that front?
Yeah, I think it's, it's really about getting down to the, what can you do? What can we help you do that you cannot do today? And is that important to you? And that's a big part of that. What's your priority in getting that done? So, it kind of depends on what you're selling. I've sold, in the ed tech world, selling curriculum. And curriculum doesn't always have the urgency. You hear a bunch of people, in the sales world saying, well, you got to create urgency, by X, Y, and Z. Well, good luck with creating urgency in school settings, especially selling curriculum during a pandemic. Quite an exciting thing to do. It's hard to create urgency. So when you can't create urgency, you have to help them understand what they'll be able to do. With our curriculum, I'll save your teachers across your entire district a lot of time. Right now they're spending 2, 3, 4 hours a week preparing for this, and we take that off the table, and we'll let them get started much more quickly without all the guesswork, right? So what is that worth to you? You got to have that conversation. So to do that, you got to kind of understand where they're coming from so that they understand the value. And if freeing up teachers, which I do think is a very important thing in this day and age, so that they can go spend time in the classroom and doing probably more important things than prepping a lesson. If that's not important to them, then it's a hard sell. That's why you need pipeline, so you can have more good conversations. But I think it's really that is what can I help you do that you want to do that you're not doing? And then let's have a conversation about how we get there.
So how did go ahead.
Yeah, and I think you can form your question. I think once you figure out what that thing is, and in a lot of industries, that's a predictable thing. It's like, oh, typically it's this one or this one or this one. Then I think you work that problem backwards into questioning and leading them down the road. How do you manage this? How are you handling that? How much time is it taking you to do these things? And I think if you can take that and back it into good questioning, you can almost work it into a math problem, right? Well, how much time are you spending? What is that time worth to you if we gave it back? Math. And you circle that and go, can we start working towards that? Should we continue this conversation if I can help you do that? Yeah, if it's compelling, then yeah. If you're barking up the wrong tree, then it might be your last meeting with that person.
So what you're describing is what a lot of people call like the business case, right? So being able to put together, work backwards from an end result and really kind of show your work, right? In the sense of showing the math behind it. And then, bringing it back into the earlier part of the conversation, tying it back into the questioning, as we just talked about. That's really it. That's one of the most, if not the most effective and powerful way to sell, especially a larger deal that's going to require significant investment. And it's really interesting. Yeah. I haven't had anyone on the show who's specifically been deep in ed tech, which it sounds like that, you're in the ed tech space. Once, a few years back, I sold to a college, which was a really interesting experience. It was the only time I've ever done a deal in the education space. And I had a lot of fun doing it, by the way. The prospects were all very smart people, had a lot of great questions, and they were all very engaged, which was really fun. But I think that's just great advice for anyone out there, right? Is to work backwards from the end state and really try to show your work along the way. And that's your business case right there. That's your, bring that right back into the proposal and tie it into what you're asking for and show deliver. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. I think too, the other piece of that is learning whatever industry you're in, understanding the business aspect of your industry, or if you're excuse me, if you're selling software and you're in a certain vertical, understand that vertical, better than your customer if you can. Back in the audio industry days, I was kind of in the musical instrument, audio world. We used to get magazines to our door. I bet we got 10 magazines to your door. And it got to the point where the office manager would just bring me the magazines because I was going to flip through, read every one of them. And I knew what every manufacturer was up to. I knew what my competitors were up to. I knew how they were talking about themselves. I would walk that into the marketing department and go, hey, see how they're doing this now? They're kind of taking this angle. I'd go into product and product development and go, hey, this is kind of a cool idea, but we could do it this way, with this spin on it, but really got a good grasp of all the moving parts in my industry. So when I went to meet with customers, whether it was a national account or a mom and pop, I had a really good feel for what their world looked like and then where I plugged into their world. And that was really powerful thing to do. And so I think, if you're new to software sales, learn the industry, build your business acumen. I think that's such a strong place to come from because
I wanted to share a tool that I started using recently. And if you're doing any prospecting or lead sourcing from LinkedIn, it's definitely worth checking out. The tool is called Surf, and it's spelled SURFE. It's a Chrome extension that allows you to add contacts to your CRM directly from LinkedIn. I use it to add contacts quickly, follow my deals, keep track of my notes, and it's actually saved me a bunch of time. The data is always 100% accurate because I don't have to copy and paste each detail from each contact over to my CRM. Instead, Surf does it all for me automatically with just one click. Now, the folks over at Surf have been kind enough to put together a promo offer for fans of SSP. You can go to the link in the show notes and use the promo code JWSURF with an E 5 for a 5% discount on your first year. Check out the link in the show notes and go check them out.
You're going to need that information to get to the actual pain, the problem you're trying to solve, because they may not know. They're not going to say, Jesse, I got this problem, and if you can fix it. They're like, I don't know. I think we're doing what we can, but it might be broken. And you've got to come in with enough insight on other opportunities or what your customers that are doing well are doing and make that comparison for them and kind of open their eyes to that a little bit. And so I think that business acumen and industry knowledge are, you just have to have them. I think and it evolves, right? So you have to continue to be into your industry. You can't just say, yeah, I studied this 10 years ago. It's like, well, that it's evolved probably a few times since then. So
Yeah. What are some ways that you've coached reps to get really to go and kind of find that information? And especially right now in call it, the last 3 years of selling where we've been work from home, there's not been I don't have any data in front of me to prove this, but I'm just guessing that there's been less on-site meetings with reps and buyers, depending on the sector that. But I know early on in my career, it was a big emphasis to get an on-site booked. And if you wanted to close a significant deal, eventually you're going to have to end up on site working with people in person. And that's harder to do because there's not, like, for example, I worked on a deal last year where we really wanted to go on site. It was a very desirable customer or prospect anyway at the time, now a customer. And the deal was a significant one, and it was a very important deal for the company on both sides. And we were like, great, let's go on site because we really want to try to understand your business as a media business. And we really wanted to understand the impact our SaaS tool is going to have on the business. And when we said, let's get some on-site, let's get an on-site scheduled, our champion there was like, well, everybody's distributed. So where are we going to meet? And are we going to fly everybody to one place somehow? Like, how does that work? And that whole aspect of it just kind of fell through, and we just decided things via Zoom. So what I'm getting at with that story is just it's harder to do now to kind of dig into a day in the life of So what are some ways that you're coaching your reps to get that kind of industry insight and get that day in the life information about who their buyer is without, the advantage of being able to go on site?
yeah, I think, definitely, having good conversations up front. I think that first meeting is really important. And I think you need to be able to share value with them quickly and show them that you understand. I think that's where a lot of this plays out. I mean, having conversations as humans, I really still believe I've ebbed and flowed on this a little bit, but I really believe that people do business with people they want to do business with, right? Like, my music background, I'm a musician, and as a drummer, you can be proficient at the gig, but if you're not a good hang before and after the gig, like, you're not getting a call back, right? Because you got to spend all day with these people, and then you're on stage with them for 2 hours, So, and I think it's the same thing with early conversation. I think so being personable without being like over the top, I think is really important just to get that, kind of find that connection. I think doing a little bit of homework up front is really important. What connections do you have? Do you know somebody that they know, right? LinkedIn's powerful that way. I went to school with so-and-so. How do you know them, right? Just having a little bit of that rapport building, but maybe knowing like where they are in their current situation. Say, hey, look, I did a little bit of homework. Here's what I think I know. Can you help me understand that? And just showing up, having done some homework, I think is a big way to kind of connect in. So I think the early conversations, and not just asking them, high level, God forbid anybody asks what keeps you up at night. Like, don't ask that question. You should have some idea of what kept them up at night, right? Because it's, it's often similar, but ask the questions, pointedly. And I think those are important to, just early. And I think if you get somebody if you can make a connection there and you can take good notes either after the fact or during, you can use that information along the line. And I think, so that you can say, hey, somebody ghosts you on a second meeting, or they're just not responding. You can, I found it effective to take the notes that I had from my first meeting and say, hey, Jesse, you shared with me before that you're really trying to push this and you wanted to do this by, next year. And to do that, I think we need to start working now. Want to get this call. I know you're busy, but let me know what works for you. And I think if you can pull on those threads, it's not just like, hey, checking in. Like, that's a no-no for my team. It's like, don't check in with anybody. Don't check in, please. Like, have a reason, have something that you're doing, and just ask them, is this a priority right now or not? Because if it's not, I'll check in with you down the road. So I think that's important to build that trust and show your value early, because then you get the team. Now, hey, Jesse, can we share this with your team so that you all are having better conversations when I'm not around of how we can help? Yeah, okay. I trusted you enough. I'm going to give you. So it was really coaching the team to do well that first one, because if you're asking very generic questions and you don't seem like you know what you're talking about, I'm not going to bring you into my team. Like, they're going to look at me and go, all right, you just wasted not 1 hour, right? You wasted, there's 5 people in the room, you wasted 5 hours. That's an expensive meeting, right? So I think showing that value, and then when you have that team there, recap why they are there. Not everybody's going to know why they're there, and have a good conversation. Hey, when Jesse and I first spoke, we talked about these things. We brought you all here for this reason. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what I'd like to cover. So that's kind of how I coached them on, just one, like, kind of know why you're in that first meeting so you can get to the second meeting. That second meeting, what's your process? Do we need to get them into the technology and show them a demo next? Or did we already show them a demo? And we're going to recap for more people. So, there's a lot of ways depending on what your ideal process is, but I think showing value up front is critical.
Here's a couple ways that I just, out of my own personal playbook here, how I research an industry and try to really understand my buyers. A couple things, and this was taught to me by a guy who is probably a top 1% SaaS seller. And he was like, you've got to go and subscribe to industry publications. So if you sell to marketing, digital marketing, contact center, DevOps, whatever it is, go and find, what do they read? Where do they read? Is it Hacker News? Is there a Reddit subreddit about it? Is there a trade publication that comes out daily, weekly, monthly, whatever? Go subscribe to those things. Hell, pay for those things if it'll help, right? See if your company, you can expense it or something like that. If there's a paid subscription, don't hesitate. Information's power. And so I've found, I was learning about a new industry a few years ago when I got into the category I sell into now, and just started subscribing to a bunch of trade publications, got into some private communities, listened to a bunch of podcasts that spoke to the buyers that I was going after. And after doing that enough, I really started to feel like I understood the job. Now, I had some other advantages. I got to go walk around on site a few times with prospecting customers. So that helps too, to go out and actually meet the people doing the job and see their, reports and look at the day-to-day. And then one other kind of cool, this works especially in small companies, is go and talk to your customer success team, and just get 15 minutes on the calendar with your customer success team and ask them some questions about the accounts that they're working with. What is it that's working for them well now? What are they seeing value in? What were the challenges that they worked on last quarter? And that's another way to really understand your ICP or your buyer persona, is go and talk to the people that are working with that persona on the post-sale side. And that's something I think a lot of us on the pre-sale, direct selling side forget to do, or we just don't feel like we're in the headspace to go do. But I would highly recommend going and talking to your head of customer success or any of your customer success reps that work on or implementation reps as well. Anybody who's working on what happens after the contract signs, and then what, and how do you help that customer solve problems. So yeah, I love this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you're dead on that if you don't have, a passion for the industry you're selling in, and if you're not genuinely curious about the problems that need to be solved in that category, then you should change to something you are passionate about. Not excited about DevOps challenges, then don't take a SaaS role where you're selling to DevOps. Go find that you like to serve and you're curious and genuinely interested in what they do, and then go and study that. It'll make you a better seller.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things, actually, when I hire reps, I will ask them in the first interview, what are you reading right now?
That's good.
What are you into? Right. And just find out who they are, because in my experience, good sales reps they're naturally curious. So, people are like, well, I'm a life learner. It's like, well, what do you read? What do you listen to? How do you learn? And they're like, well, it's like, well, I don't know, not much of a life learner if you're not learning new things. But a life learner is usually like, well, I'm reading this. Like, I read classical literature, and sometimes I find kind of parallels in sales and marketing world. It's like, oh, it's a story from this book, right? And can draw things. But I read marketing books, and I read sales books, and I read all kinds of different things because I'm just curious. So I ask reps, what are you reading right now? And if they can answer, oh, I'm reading this in this, and oh gosh, if you haven't checked this out, right, it gets the wheels spinning. Like, okay, well, I've got somebody who is a life learner. The next thing I will ask them, or in that line of that first meeting, is what do you know about the company? And it's interesting because sometimes you see somebody, and they're looking at you in the camera, and because I'm doing virtual, and they'll do one of these. It's like, oh, and they read the headline from your website. And it's like, okay, not much. Didn't do your homework.
Yeah, I
On
remember.
the flip side, yeah, just to close that thought, on the flip side, I've had people that found they definitely did their research. You're this, you're this. I see you're into this. They found marketing assets that our marketing team didn't even know were still out in the world. Like they had to dig hard. I mean, they were in the depths of you know multi-page search on us just to see, and they had consumed it and watched webinars that were like 3 years old. It's like, okay, you're interested because you spent your time and you did your homework. That bodes well.
Yeah, I was gonna say so I interviewed somebody, this is a few years ago when I was in a leadership role, and we interviewed a rep for an SDR position. And I used to ask that question too. I don't know where I had heard that, but I had asked, and that was my indicator. Like if you ask someone what's a recent book you read, and they have a really good answer to that, you're like, wow, this person's obviously really curious. They're passionate. They're staying sharp on, and it doesn't matter what the book is. It could be, I don't care. They're just storytelling and that kind of thing. I actually just recently tweeted that too, that everyone should go back who's in sales and reread some of the like high school literature, because
Oh yeah,
storyteller, everything, your communication flows better when you're reading old books, even if it's fiction. I love nonfiction too. So I asked this guy this question. I was like, yeah, what's the recent book you read? And he was like, oh, I think I read like To Kill a Mockingbird in high school or something like that. And it was the last book. You're probably what, 25, and if the last book you read was in high school, then you're clearly not someone who's trying to stay sharp.
yeah.
People that would answer that question with like the most amazing, hey, oh yeah, I just recently read this book and it was about this topic and here's what I learned from it. And that's when you're like, oh, that's a good hire right there. So
Yeah.
message for the sellers out there, like stay sharp, read classics. Like you said, I think that's the secret weapon, is like you're reading classic literature, you're learning the art of human storytelling. And if you can apply that in some way back to your business, you're going to sell more deals.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I agree with that. I had a really good high school literature teacher, and he said, build a library. And I was like, what does that even mean? Now I know, have books and pick them up and read them. But same, I'd be reading, I'm reading Moby Dick right now. And there's so many things I'm like, huh, anecdotally, you just kind of like, that's interesting. Like I could use that somewhere. I'm going to use that in a conversation when it lands, right? So yeah, I 100% agree with that.
So I want to go back to something you said a little bit ago. You said you referenced just selling ed tech during a pandemic. And I think this is a topic I've talked about a little bit on the show, but it's a topic that's definitely top of mind for everybody out there. If you're listening to this show off the press, it's 2023. And this has been, in my career, probably the most challenging selling year that I've experienced. And I got started in 2012. So post, Great Recession. And it's been a nice, growth curve since then. The economy's done really well, and the SaaS business, the cloud computing business, has done incredibly well in that time frame. And 2023 was the first year where I felt like the wind got knocked out of me in a lot of ways. I know you're someone who's been around for a long time. You're someone who's coached a lot of reps through different eras of business, and so I just wanted to see if you could share some insights into how to survive, tight economic times, or, in your case, a pandemic, selling to ed tech when there's not a lot of teaching going on, right? Or there's not a lot of people in person to work on those things. Tell us some things, maybe mindset, in terms of mindset, that help you get through it. Because I think right now people are in survival mode and everyone's hoping that 2024 ends up better, but nobody really knows for sure. We could be in this for somewhat of a long haul, right? So how do you up every day knowing that your job's at risk, that you may not be able to hit your, the right performance metrics, you may not make the kind of money that you're hoping to make this year or next year? How do we get through this?
Yeah. And that's tough. And I know, it depends on kind of the industry you're in. And the, unglamorous response is keep going, and don't pull up, because in the pandemic for us, selling computer science curriculum during a pandemic, there was a lot of an assumption of, well, they're just not gonna talk to us. But what we found was that sure, some people were overwhelmed, right? And so you proceed with extreme empathy, and you maybe just say, hey, look, like, when would be a good time to connect? I know you've got things going on here, and maybe I'm not the person you need to talk to today, but I do want to keep this going. So it was always sort of treading lightly, but also not getting hung up on this assumption that they're not going to want to talk to me at all this year. They're not going to even entertain this. For us, during the pandemic, we kind of pivoted a little bit to student engagement. That students need engagement, and no better way to engage them than through understanding how technology works. So computer science curriculum. So finding that sort of a message shift on why would we need this now? Well, you need this more than ever because kids are kind of at a loss. You hear a lot about learning loss and things like that, and they just need to be re-engaged. And so we kind of pivoted our message to, okay, help your students get engaged by giving them quality computer science that gets them fired up. And then we did hear from folks that said we get students that just wouldn't show up on days where they had math. So we parked computer science in front of math, and lo and behold, they showed up for computer science and they stayed for math, right? So finding those kind of moments in what you do. And I think if we just pulled back and went into crisis mode, we would have, which I'm sure we did for a minute until we got our bearings. But we just got out and started talking to customers. What's happening right now? What are you seeing? Right. And sometimes I get a prospect, and all I did, we didn't sell them that particular person anything, but I asked a lot of questions about what was going on in their world, and did a lot of learning that I could then take to the next one and go, okay, now I know this much. Now let me go and kind of have the same conversation. So what are you seeing? Where are the priorities? How are things getting done today that they weren't getting done before? And so that was a big one. And then we started following funding. For us, there was a lot of ESSER funds and emergency funding that kind of popped up, and that helped a little bit. So I don't have a succinct one-liner, but I'd say keep going, but talk to your customers, find out what they know, what's happening now, how is that changing your offering and what they do, and does that put you in a better light? Does it put you in a different light? It might even open up some doors for you depending on what you're selling. So keep going and learn from your customers at any turn. I've been on a demo gone wrong, and I would just start going into interview mode on totally different, just because I'm not sure that this person was the right fit. Maybe it was an SDR up. It's kind of but tell me about your boss. What do they care about right now? How are they navigating this, and what's their priority, and where does this fit in line? What would the process be? And then write it down and share with the team. I think that's the other big thing, is share the things that you find.
I think it's really interesting because our conversation almost went full circle, right? What you're saying is the answer to survivorship, or being a survivor in a tough economic situation, or a tough market, right, is to still remain human, right? To be a human self, and to still remain curious about your industry, and to still try to connect genuinely with your buyer. And don't lose, as long as you're still asking questions and seeking to solve problems for buyers, there's going to be a need for you as a seller out there. Now, you can't control as a seller company financials, your company's financials, whether they need to do layoffs or not, whether your job is fully secure or not, but you can work on your craft. You can work on your understanding of the category you sell to, and building your network of people that you sell to. Those are the things that you can control. And I think it's just interesting, is what I'm hearing is that, that's the answer, is to just stay the course and don't shy away, or, don't pull away from being, humanized and selling as a human to a human. How do you manage stress? You've been, a leader in a lot of companies. You've sold through some tough economic times, whether that's pandemics or recessions. I'm sure you've been in, companies that have had their good quarters and bad quarters. I think we all have in this business. How do you stay, sort of stoic and stress and anxiety that come with being in charge of a team that has to deliver a that may or may not be possible?
Yeah, well, I mentioned before, I'm a drummer. So when all else fails, I will go bang on drums for a few. And one of the best things about the pandemic is, working from home, largely from home. And I've got a studio in my basement with drums. So I'll go down there and just take 10 minutes in between, and go kind of get that release. But I do coach my team to find that release, whatever that is. If that's time with your kids, if that's taking a walk, if that's working out. I know, some of my reps have, their setup is in their workout room. This look like they could just spin their chair around and, throw some weights around a little bit. And so I think definitely finding the energy, because sales can sap your energy. It can really take it out of you if you let it. And I think being able to kind of remove yourself from that and go get psyched up in some other way, whatever feeds your energy, then you need, go find that and make time for it. So it's like kind of showing up with that mindset. I get reps who are like, I'm just not feeling. I'm like, stop what you're doing and go do that thing. And then, then let's talk. Yeah. If you're still not there, then just, go do something that's not forward facing. Go do research or something that is sort of, give yourself some grace before you get back on the phones or before you get back into doing demos or whatever it is, to kind of energize yourself so that you show up fired up. I think that's very important.
That's the beauty of sales, is it's a results-based profession, and can figure out the formula for delivering as best as you can. And again, you can't always guarantee the outcome, but the inputs that should deliver the outputs, right? And so once you can crack that code, like you're saying, if you're just having an off morning or an off afternoon or an off day, you can, rather than try to do cold calls or run a bunch of meetings, you can, focus on research or something behind the scenes, or, you can take some time away, and come back, and then, you got to ride kind of the creativity waves and the productivity waves that come in this industry. And in that energy, you got to go sit down at the desk and get it done. And then when you're not feeling that energy, you can step away, and that's the formula. So I think that's
absolutely.
Have something like drumming or exercise or whatever your thing is to completely disconnect from the stress and anxiety that come with it.
Yeah. Big fan of just time blocking, which I know is not a new concept, but the cool thing about time blocking is you can move the blocks. And so if you're just not feeling something, just scoot that block over, give yourself a half hour, just push it. Like, don't push it out of the day. Don't push it out of the week. Like, you still get them done, but move it or rearrange it to where you can kind of align with where your energy is, so that you're not, if hitting the phones doesn't energize you in some way, then maybe check that too. Because if the job is to hit the phones all day, then you're gonna need a lot of something to get you energized to be able to pick up the phone all the time. If you like hitting the phones, then you're in a good spot, right? So it's a little bit of both.
Well, Andy, this has been an amazing conversation. I appreciate you sharing insights from your side of the world and your experience. Undoubtedly, there'll be some listeners out there who want to get in touch with you. How can the audience reach out or get into your inbox?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is a good way to do that. So Andy, it's actually Andy Teipen 1 is my profile. I'm not actually sure why there's the 1 after it, but Andy Teipen 1 on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email, just Andy Teipen, and Teipen is TEIPEN @gmail.com. Would be, love to connect with like-minded sales leaders, and also, I've done, and I'm also doing some sales consulting, kind of on the side. So if anyone's out there wants to connect and connect that way, then I'm open to that as well.
Well, thanks again, Andy, and look forward to having you back on the show again sometime soon.
Thanks, Jesse. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.